All right. Hey, Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. And, I really wanted you to be on the show today because I read your book, 2K to 10K. And honestly, it's one of the best books I've ever read on writing. And the funny thing about it, too, is I almost didn't read the book because I know you write fiction. And the book is basically about how to write fiction better. And I write almost all nonfiction. So for me, I was kind of skeptical, would I even learn anything from this book? But, I gave it a shot. And honestly, it was one of the best books I've read on writing. So today I want to talk about that, and especially how you approach the writing process and how you deal with organizing your writing process. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started as an author.
Well, like a lot of authors, I always wanted to write. From when I was a little girl, I always wanted to tell stories, and the type of stories I wanted to tell changed as I grew up. Like originally, I wanted to draw comics and manga, and then I wanted to maybe do movies, but books were always my when I thought up my stories, books were always how they came to me. I'm not actually a very visual person, and I can't draw very well, so art very quickly kind of went down the tubes. But books are what I kept coming back to over and over, and by the time it was time for me to go to college, I was like, I knew 100% I wanted to be an author, and so I went and I got an English degree thinking that would make me an author, and it made me really good at writing essays, but not very much on the author part of things. Though the University of Georgia's English department is very good, and if you like literary criticism, I highly recommend it. And then basically, I got out of college, and I was like, what am I gonna do? I really want to be a writer, but I don't really know how to go about it. And at that point, this is back in about 2004, I discovered Holly Lyle's website, which was sort of the place to be if you were like a newbie writer at that period of time. And it was just sort of like, if you want to be a writer, start writing. And I was like, really? That's all it takes to start? Oh, okay. So I just started writing. And what happened next was I spent an entire year writing a 220,000 word novel, a YA, 220,000 word fantasy YA, which is like 2 books. It's huge. And there was really self-publishing wasn't really anything like it is now. And so I went to New York with it, and I got rejected by everyone. And I spent like 2 years working on this. And finally I was like, man, screw it. I really want to write a new book. So I just sat down and I started kind of just writing the story that was fun to me at the time, and that ended up becoming The Spirit Thief, which is my first published novel, which is published through Orbit Books, which is the fantasy science fiction arm of Hachette, I didn't even actually know how to pronounce Hachette until the Amazon Hachette thing became news, and I'm like, oh, that's how you pronounce them, because I was just calling them Hatchet, like you hit things with. But anyway, they're French. But so that was kind of how, and then once I got The Spirit Thief, I got my agent, which is another whole ridiculous story. But I went through the query system. I didn't do anything special. I just came up through the slush pile. And then my agent sold me in a 3-book deal to Orbit, to Davy Pillai at Orbit. And the rest is sort of history. I've just been sort of working from there. But yeah, it really started with, I think I'll sit down and write a book today. And then a year later, I had a book.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So, how did you first start out as a writer? What was your writing process back then, and how has that evolved over the years?
Well, I think I started out in probably the dumbest way possible, which was I literally just sat down and was like, I am going to write a book. Prologue. And then I just started, I didn't know who was in the book. I didn't know what to do with the book. I barely knew anything about my world, and I got about maybe 5,000 words in, and I was like, this is not going to work. And so I stopped, and then I did a ton of world building. I was reading all this stuff about how to do world building, and I started doing all this. People talk about story Bibles and all this kind of stuff, so I started doing all this world building. And I actually did so much world building, I started to hate my own world. Because when you're planning out like the lineages of like the kingdom before the kingdom you're in, and you're like, this is so dumb. You're never going to use this. I'm not personally making all of Lord of the Rings. We're just going to. So then I had to back up So I went from no planning to way too much planning. And really writing that first book, which was a failure on a lot of levels, but still I think a big success. There are parts of that book that I actually still really like. I think the number one thing I learned from that very early process, though, was the importance of writing every day and having an idea for where your story is going to go. And some writers aren't like this, but for me at least, I need a destination. I need somewhere to go. I can't just meander around and wait for a path to appear, because for me, it never does. Or if it does, it goes the wrong way. So I like to know where I'm going, and that's kind of the essence. All of planning in a nutshell is really just where are you going, knowing where this story is going to go. And when you boil everything else down, that's really what it's about. And I think this is the same for fiction and for nonfiction, is knowing where you're going to go with this argument, knowing where you're going with this logic. And for stories, it's knowing where you're going with this plot. How are the problems going to be solved? What's the big meta plot at the end? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So what is the actual process that you go through? I mean, let's pretend like right now you're coming up with a new book idea right now. How would you start plotting and planning out that book?
Oh, well, I actually have a 5-step process. I'm a big fan of bulleted lists. As anyone who's ever seen anything I've done will know. I have a 5-step process for plotting, and it's actually on my blog. You can read the whole thing written out on my blog, which you just go to rachelaaron.net and click on blog. And on the left-hand sidebar, where it says Rachel's Greatest Hits, you'll see how I plot a novel in 5 steps, and it's also in 2K to 10K. So there you go. But and this process, by the way, has not really changed since I started. Since I wrote 2K to 10K, it's been this. It's different. It's a little different for every book, but the general bones are still the same. And which is I start out, which is by writing down everything I know. Because generally speaking, when I'm about to start a book, I've actually kind of been thinking about it for a while. Like maybe I got the idea while I was writing another book. And so I start out by just dumping onto a page everything I know about the book, who's in it, where it's taking place, what are the big cool scenes I want to do, you know, what's like the magic system, anything I know. And this can be a little or it can be a lot, but just sort of getting the what you already know. And then from there, I start working on the major parts of the story, which are the characters, the plot, and oh my god, I suddenly blanked on my own process. Hang on. I don't want to get this wrong. Generally speaking, characters, plot, and sort of the where you're going with the book.
It's like the story arc?
The story arc. This can be the meta plot as well if you are writing a book that you know is going to be more than one book. And if you are writing fiction, I actually highly recommend writing in series, because that is definitely the way you make money. Yeah. That is the way to go. And once I've sort of gotten down all the basics of the book, I've gotten down like who's in it. I also do a thing what I call the power players, which are characters who aren't actually really maybe characters in the book, but they're very important people in the book. Like Dumbledore in Harry Potter is a great example. He's not really a character, but he's not like one of the Holy Trinity of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, but he's very important in the novels. And so I get down all the big names, and I also make sure that I know the ending of the book. And I can't really stress that enough, at least for my plotting process, is again, you got to know where you're going. You have to know how this book ends. And you can be wrong, by the way. You can change your mind later. Like if you get into it, it doesn't work. But you got to at least kind of know where you're going. If for nothing else, to figure out how long the sucker is going to be. Like if your ending is the catastrophic cataclysm that ends the world, well, there's probably a lot of book in between like the beginning and that. So you got to know that. Mm-hmm. And finally, I also I lay down my setting really well just so I know what's going on. And from there, what we're really doing is we're building our stage and getting our actors. And then from there, I go back and I fill in the holes. So anything I don't know about the plot, anything I don't know about people, I fill in all the holes in the book, and I do this a lot by writing a timeline, just what happens when. And once I've got that, once I've got my timeline and everything, then I sort of like to think through the book. Like the book is almost done at this point, and I look through the book almost like a movie, and I don't really worry about dialogue. I don't worry about any of the details. I just kind of think this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I just sort of think through the whole novel so I can kind of see how it's all going to go together. And that's really good for figuring out any parts where you don't know what's going on or things are boring. But once you've got all that, once you can kind of go through your whole book from beginning to end, just like this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, then you're ready to go. You can just start. And for all the people who are listening right now and like horror and like, oh my God, how does she write like that? That sounds so boring, or that sounds so rigid, and there's no way I can write like that. My characters need to talk to me. Trust me, my characters talk to me. Like, everything I've just laid out is merely the roadmap. It's merely the starting position. And no plan survives the first encounter with the enemy. You know, the moment you actually start writing that book, everything starts to change. And you can go and you can change everything on the fly, but the important part of plotting and doing all this plotting ahead of time is it enables you to kind of pull back and say, if I want to change the scene, what are the ramifications down the line? And you have a much better idea of how much of a risk you're taking. So you're free to follow your characters wherever they want to go, but you always have a map to get you back to where you want to go. And I think that's the real benefit. So it's not that I do this and it's regimented and, you know, neat and tidy, everything is in its place. It's not really how it is. It's more like I've built a map, and then I am free to explore the countryside, knowing that I have my map to keep me on target and hopefully within my timeline.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Basically my
That's
plan.
awesome.
And this
Yeah,
is, of course, again, all discussed in much more detail in 2K to 10K, and probably makes a lot more sense there. But
yeah, totally. Yeah, you know, and it's really similar to like in the business world. Like, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs, if you want to like raise money from investors, you have to have a business plan. But like it's kind of a joke in the business world because everyone knows like no one actually follows a business plan, right? But the reason it's so important is because, you know, the person who takes the time to create a business plan is much more invested in that business. And it's like the same thing as an author. The more time you spend plotting and planning out and outlining your book, the more you are invested in that book, and the better you understand it. So that, like you said, when things do change, you know, it's really easy to make those changes because you understand the ramifications, you understand, you know, where this book is going to go, rather than just, you know, opening up a word processor and just writing on a blank piece of paper and not really understanding where this is going.
oh, absolutely. And another thing that I feel really is vital to me in my own plotting is that by mapping out the steps that I know the characters are going to take, I get to understand them a little better. Because generally speaking, you don't really know a character until you spend a book in the foxhole with them, basically. But the pre-plotting, I found, kind of helps you get a better sense of that character and what they're going to do. And it's really kind of I like to think of it almost as pre-writing. You're going through the struggles, you're looking at your set pieces, you're thinking, what's this going to look like? What's this person going to do? And that tells you a lot about them, and then you can look back, you can go back in your plotting and say, oh, well, if he really is this kind of person, then he wouldn't have done this thing earlier. And it allows you to kind of make those very big, broad-level changes before you even start writing, which saves you a ton of rewriting and a ton of erasing scenes and redoing them once you actually get into the novel.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then, you know, and after I've started applying this own process to my books for nonfiction, I've also noticed that I stopped as much rewriting as well, because I'm not, you know, I don't write an entire chapter and then find out, oh, that chapter doesn't really fit in this book, or, you know, that's totally a tangent or something like that. Like, it doesn't happen anymore because I've, you know, planned it out ahead of time. So, I mean, how much time do you actually spend doing this, you know, doing this organization planning process for your books?
Well, that really actually varies from book to book. Some books I know exactly where I'm going, like the first of my science fiction trilogy, Fortune's Pawn. I knew exactly where that book was going to go. I knew exactly what was going to happen before I even sat down. It just all kind of came to me. And so I think I did maybe 3 days total of planning on that one. Like, and that's from scratch. That's the entire world. That's the universe. That's everything that went into this massive science fiction story, which is crazy. But I knew what I was going to do. I had everything I needed. And then on other books where I didn't know as well, there's actually a book that I kind of wrote half of and sent it to my agent, but then it hasn't been published. But it was sort of this like gaslight detective stuff. And that book took me almost a week and a half to do all the planning on, because I really didn't know. The world was very complicated. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go. So there was a lot of auxiliary exploration that went on, and I think I threw away a character and that kind of stuff. So it depends on the story you're telling.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say 3 days, I mean, you're talking like 8-hour days. How much time are you actually spending on it?
Oh, yeah, I work 8-hour days. But actually, they're really more like 7-hour days because of like time lost to email and that kind of thing. And I have a 4-year-old son, and so there's always a little craziness around when he comes and goes. Yeah, I would say about 6 to 8-hour days when I block off. But I'm a full-time writer, and I have the luxury to just sit down and do a whole day plotting. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people write kind of in the margins, you know, before they go to work, after they come home. And for those people, I would say, you know, never worry too much about how much time your plotting is taken, because every like hour you spend plotting is going to save you like 10 hours later on. So it's worth it to take the time to really get your feet grounded in your book. And when you feel comfortable, just jump into it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely found that to be true. It saves you, every hour of planning saves you several hours of writing and rewriting for sure.
Yeah, well, it's like a pint of sweat is worth a gallon of blood. So,
yeah.
I think Patton used to say that in terms of making plans and checking things.
Yeah. So, are there any other organizational tips that you have for writers?
I would say to writers, in terms of organization, like before you start the book, to really trust your gut. It's very easy to get way too organized, like I did, like I was talking about I did. And it's also very easy to just think you're ready and to be missing several parts. So I would say that kind of before, when you think you're ready to start your book, or when you're really eager to start your book, then you just have this excitement about it. Because excitement's a big part of writing. You got to really want to write that book. And so when your excitement is going, just kind of look at what you've got and trust your gut for if you have enough. Like, does this feel like a full story? Can you see the cover? Can you see the back blurb? Can you think about the kind of books that are going to be next to it? Like, really see if it feels like a whole book. Or does it still feel like, I don't know, like at no point should you ever say to yourself, I don't know, I'll figure it out in the middle. Like, that's a warning flag. That's a sign that you don't know what's going on and you're setting yourself up for a disaster at the best case and failure at the worst case. So any point where you've got like if you want to save yourself a great deal of tears and stress, never say, I'll figure out the middle of the book in the middle of the book. That's the worst place to figure out the middle of the book. Figure it out now, and you'll probably figure it out in like 6 hours as opposed to 60 days later. It's ridiculous. That'd be my number one suggestion.
Yeah. Have you ever plotted out a book and then just, scrapped it, just said, it's not worth my time, or it's just not the story I want to write right now?
Oh, yes. I'm actually really bad about that. I am a chronic starter and then not finisher. I've probably written 20 to 50,000 words, and then thrown out about 20 novels at this point. And it's because I could write so fast that I have the luxury of doing this. Because I'll get into a novel and I'll just realize, like, I hate this character, or the world is fundamentally uninteresting. The stuff that I originally liked about it isn't enough to carry a book. And kind of here's a bit of a tip that took me a really long time to learn, which is that not every idea is worthy of being a book. Like, there are lots of writers are just overflowing with really good ideas. And it's easy to get really, really excited about these ideas. And that's good. But not every idea that you're really, really, really excited about is worthy of actually becoming a full novel. And being able to determine which ideas are and which aren't sometimes takes a lot of plotting and even some writing before you realize this idea is just not going to be able to hold up the weight of 100,000 words. And maybe it will work better as a short story, or maybe it will work better as a novella, and maybe you can save it, or maybe it just needs to be pitched. And that's kind of a call you need to make at the time. That's always book by book. But, you know, I actually have an entire 120,000 word novel that I loved and spent like 5 months on. I mean, just forever on this book. 6 months. 6 months on. And I ended up not publishing it because it was I called it my abusive boyfriend book, because I would try to leave it and I would always come crawling back, even if it treated me really, really badly. And finally I finished it, and it wasn't actually that good. I'd put all that work into it, and I like to think that, you know, I know what I'm doing at this point. But as much as I loved the idea, I couldn't make it work. I couldn't make it into a good book. And it was better, I would rather let that book die in the drawer than have to write a sequel to it, was kind of my thinking. I didn't want to write a sequel, but it needed a sequel. And I didn't want to inflict it upon my fans. So I was like, just go live in a drawer, book, we're done. But if I had listened to my instincts sort of at the beginning when I was like, I don't really like this, I wouldn't have gone through all that pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, we have a really, if you've gotten to the point where you like stories enough to want to write them, you generally speaking have a pretty good nose for when things are going rotten. And you need to really trust that gut instinct and listen to it, because if you feel like the book isn't good, the answer is not, I'll work harder on it. The answer is, step back. Why is it not good? And you may be able to fix it. And I've fixed lots of books, but you really got to trust your kind of writer instinct on it, which is kind of, you know, a little new agey, but you really do. And it's really just kind of your gut reaction. It's the reader part of your mind saying, I don't like this, and you need to listen to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of new authors especially kind of over or underestimate really, you know, how much or how many books you can write and then don't publish or don't think are worthy, or, you know, just stop halfway through, because, you know, you always see, like, you know, everyone knows Rachel Aaron's published novels, but no one sees your unpublished work, right? Like, no one knows until you share with the world, you know, I wrote this one and it was awful, and I wrote this one and I threw it out. But there is a lot of work that goes into writing beyond just the book that you complete. It's all the books and all the practice leading up to that as well.
Exactly. Like I have currently I have 9 books published, 10 with 2K to 10K, but I've written about 14. And those other books are books that just were not good enough. And one of the things I've tried to do with because one of the things, again, like in business, that you'd hear a lot as an author is you got to build your personal brand. And this isn't just about like having covers that all match. It's about what are you bringing to the table as an artist. And my brand, which I decided kind of early, is fun, enjoyable, really good stories, a brand of quality. And so if a book does not meet my quality standards, it doesn't matter how much time I spent on it, I'm not publishing it, or I'm not sending it to a publisher, because it's not good enough. It's not good enough to be a Rachel Aaron book. And I've been really lucky. I have a lot of really good reviews, and I think a lot of that is because I self-edit a great deal, and I don't let things that aren't up to the standard pass. And I like to think of my favorite game design company is Blizzard, and they have a thing about if it's not good, it doesn't ship. Like, they don't care when the deadline is. If it's not good, it doesn't ship, and that's what I do. If it's not good enough, I don't do anything with it. I can try to fix it, but I would rather throw away work than publish something I am not 100% proud of. And I think that's really important when you're an author, because a lot of times when you're an author, it's just you. It's just you doing all this stuff, especially as a self-published author. You are a one-man or woman show, and you have to be your own quality control. Just because you put work into it does not mean it's a good book, or that it's a book that you should put out. If you have people, and of course every author loves or hates their own work depending on things, but you need to, like, try to be objective and to listen to people who actually are objective if they tell you the book has problems. I am, and not to discourage anyone or disparage anyone who has published the first book they've ever written. There have actually been lots of people, both traditionally published and self-published, who have published the very first book they ever wrote and did fantastic. But I always get so tickled by people who are like, I just finished my first book, I'm going to publish it and make $1 million. And I'm like, wait, hold up. If you were a potter and you'd made one pot, would you think I'm going to sell it at an art gallery? If you were like playing the piano, if you were a pianist and you just learned, you're giving your first recital, would you charge people $100 admission? No. And writing is no different. Writing is an art. It's going to take you a while to get good. And some people are fantastic right out the gate, and others aren't. And I hear new authors, again, both traditional and self-published, say to me, I worked for 18 months on this book, I'm going to publish it. And to them I say, the fact that you worked 18 months doesn't actually mean anything to your reader.
Yeah,
your reader, it's not like, books are not like cheese. They don't get better the longer you age them. You know, a reader is not going to look at this and say, someone spent 18 months on it, I should enjoy it. They're going to say, this book is crap, or this book is good, and they're going to make that decision in like 2 seconds. So, and I know that's a very harsh thing, that's a very harsh reality, but that's part of the writing game, is that you've got to be your own quality control. You've got to seek out objective opinions and then listen to them. And objective opinions, you know, you can ask your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or your best friend or whatever to read your book, but that's not an objective opinion. Your mom is not an objective opinion. She's going to love it because it's your book. You got to go find beta readers or a writing critique group, and there's lots of them online, but you got to find someone who doesn't have a stake in being your friend, and then get them to read your book and then listen to what they have to say. But at the same time, and this is where things get tricky, you've also got to have the artistic integrity to say, I want it like that when you have someone giving you criticism you don't agree with, if you feel that you have good basis for not agreeing with it. Like I had someone, like with Nice Dragons Finish Last, my self-published novel, I had the editor I hired to be my developmental editor gave me all this criticism because she was trying to make Julius into more of a romance hero. She was like, oh, he's too wimpy. Oh, he's too weak. Oh, he's too indecisive. And I'm like, but that's who Julius is. The whole idea is that he's a nice dragon. He doesn't act like the other dragons. He's not ruthless or cruel or ambitious. He's this kind of nice slacker guy, and a nice slacker guy doesn't act like that. And that's the whole point. So that's an example of when I pretty much just said, no, you're wrong, to my editor and did what I wanted anyway, and it worked out. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But it's a fine line between being able to listen to objective criticism and being able to have integrity as an artist and to stand on your ideas. And writers, unfortunately, there's no right answer for how to feather that line. You've just got to try and do your best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And the tough thing too is that a lot of times the really best critiques and reviews come in a really kind of negative package. Like you might get a 1-star review on Amazon, and it might feel like a personal attack. But when you read the review, you see like, oh, you know, that idea really could help improve my book or help improve my writing. And you have to kind of detach from the emotional element of it to learn the lesson basically.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of writers I know who don't read reviews because, especially in traditional publishing, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. The book's out there. The book's in, like, you've got 10,000 copies of that sucker printed and sitting on shelves. There's nothing you can do to fix it. You get a 1-star review that tears you apart. Even if you agree with it, it's too late. But self-publishing is actually very cool because if I let's say I was a new writer and I put out a book I was really proud of, and that I had every reason to think was gonna do well, and I just got tons of 1-star reviews, or even one 1-star review that I really agreed with, I have the choice to take that book off publication, to edit it, fix it, put it back up, maybe even with a new cover and a new title, and suddenly it's a new book. And you can do that, and that's one of, I think, one of the coolest things about self-publishing that I think a lot of people actually aren't taking advantage of is if you do put up a book and it gets terrible reviews and terrible press, you can always take it down, you know, kind of eat your losses, give up your negative reviews, fix it, and then republish with all the new changes and start fresh. You can always reinvent yourself, and that's very exciting because in traditional publishing, you can't do that. You have to, you get married to your sales. Your sales follow you like a ball and chain your whole life when in traditional publishing. Like if you did bad on that one book 20 years ago, people still remember that. They're going to say, well, you look awesome. You've done well for 18 books, but there was that one book. So we're going to cut $5,000 off your advance. Well, not really. It doesn't actually go like that. But you definitely have a criminal record on the other side of the fence, where in self-publishing, you can take stuff down and change your name and republish new books, and it's like old books never happened. And that's actually really, really nice from an author's perspective, I think. That's a nice safety net. Not that you would ever want to do that, not that that should be anyone's first choice, because it still is going to suck really bad to watch your book get torn apart in public. And I would never, ever recommend using Amazon as like a critique group of angry reviewers. That's terrible. But you have the option. It's a nuclear option, and it's nice to have.
Mm. Yeah, and I think a lot of people underestimate how much kind of trial and error goes into writing. You know, like you never really know how good a book is until other people read it. I mean, you know, I can always have this idea in my mind, oh, this is my best book, this is my best work, this is, you know, really going to help people. But then, you know, I don't really know that for sure until people read it and they give me feedback, and then I know, okay, you know, this is how the market appreciates this book or doesn't.
Oh, yeah, and you could be totally wrong, too. Like, I think the two best books I ever wrote, with the exception of Nice Dragons, because it was my latest book, but were the last Eli book of my fantasy series and the last book of my science fiction series, because I thought they both ended really well. But according to reviews, the second book I wrote in my science fiction series, which would be Honor's Night, is the best book. And that's the book I hate the most. Like, I think that's the worst book I've ever written. I was like, I got it out, I got it done. I was like, it's good. It's not as good as I wanted it to be, but it's good enough. I'm sending it. Like, it works. But I was still, at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I could have made it better. And then people loved it. People absolutely loved it. And I think one of the problems with that book was I had spent so many times rewriting it. I rewrote that whole book like 3 times that I couldn't tell anymore whether or not it was good. I always thought it was bad. And even though like my editor was like, I love this book, I was like, you're wrong. It's terrible. It sucks. I'm a terrible writer. Oh my God, my career is over. This happens. Writers think this all the time. And then everyone loved it, and everyone thought it was like the best book ever. And so what do I know? And I'll have characters that I think are amazing, and then characters I really struggle with, and then everyone loves the characters I struggled with, and I'm like, really? Okay. But sometimes it's so hard to judge. It's so hard to judge what's going to be popular. You just can't tell.
Yeah, I call that writer blindness. It's like after a while you've been writing the book so long, you're just completely blind. Like you can't read it objectively as a reader anymore. You're just totally in writer mode, and you need that third-party opinion to really get you on track.
That is absolutely true. And the same thing but different typos. Like I can't see my typos at all. They're just, my brain fills in the missing text, and I have to have someone else read it. You can't catch your own typos. You've got to have someone who doesn't know what they're reading read it. Mm. But yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. I had another idea, but it's gone. So.
Okay, so let's talk about writing fast, because we haven't really talked about that yet today. But it's a big part of your book 2K to 10K, and it's also a big part of really what makes you unique as a writer, because you write really, really fast. So. How fast do you write now, and how did you get that way?
Well, my record currently is I wrote 15,700 words in one day. That's my record. I cheated a little. I wrote 13 hours that day. I normally only write 8, and I write 10K. But I had a 13-hour day where I was just, I mean, I was on fire. It was the very end of my science fiction series, and that would be, I was writing the end of Heaven's Queen, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew exactly where we were going, and I'm like, I'm going to finish this book today, and I just did it. And when it comes to writing fast, like as I said, I generally go between 7,000 and 10,000 words a day. It's sort of my happy writing, comfortable area. And I have days where I drop down to even 2,000 because I'm doing something wrong. And I always kind of take it as a warning sign when I'm writing below my average by about a little over 1,000 words an hour. I can write 1,500 words an hour. It means Rachel's really happy and everything's going really well. At 1,000 words an hour is more of everything's going pretty good. We're nominal. It's medium. And anything below that's generally a sign of trouble with the story, and that's something I've kind of figured out from doing this so long. But the most important thing for writing fast is, again, to know where you're going. And I actually have a little system for this, where I have a triangle, and it's got 3 sides, and you have to hit all 3 to go super fast. And the first side of the triangle is knowledge, which can basically be summed up as know what you're going to write before you write it. And this isn't even the stuff I talked about before with knowing the end of the book. I mean, I'm talking about knowing the scene that you're going to write. And what I do before I start writing, like before I open my laptop or anything, is I sit down with my notebook, and I sort of just write out a very brief summary of what the scene I'm going to be writing is about. Like, Joseph is going to meet the queen, or whatever. I pick a character, and whatever the scene for that day is going to be, and I write out the back and forth dialogue like super fast. I just say, this person's going to say this, and this person's going to say this. And I write out like descriptions of the scenery, just really quick, like I was like taking notes for a painting I was going to paint later. And it's really actually a lot like sketching. You're sketching the scene in your notes. And the value of this is it allows you to uncover problems that are going to happen in the scene at a stage when you're in a notebook page. You can just literally just draw a line through whatever you just wrote and just start again. And discovering those problems in sort of the very early sketching stage is huge, because you're not solving them inside the text when you're actually writing, which is the most time-consuming way to solve any problems. Because, you know, when you're writing along and you realize that this isn't working, and then you got to go back and you lose entire paragraphs, and that just all work down the drain. And this skips all of that down the drain stuff, figuring it out in the sketches. And then when you actually start to write, you know exactly where you're going, you know exactly what you're going to do, you know exactly what everyone's going to say, and you can change your mind in the scene as things strike you. But you've already sort of figured it out. You're good. It's like you've already done it before. And so you can do it much faster. And just that one step, figuring out, just taking 5 minutes to figure out what you're going to write before you type any words, often helps people double their word count, for the obvious reason of you already know what you're going to say. You don't have to figure it all out in the middle. It allows you to focus in your actual writing more on the prose and the actual descriptions and the clever lines. You can actually focus more on the writing part of writing than on the plotting part of writing or on the scene blocking part of writing, because you've already done all that. And I found it's made me not just a faster writer, but a better writer, because I'm much more in the moment and in the scene because I'm going so fast. And the second part of the triangle is time. I actually have a whole, and again, this is all on 2K to 10K and on my blog at rachelaaron.net, but I have a whole system that I use to track my time. And I did this, and I don't do this every day, but I did it at the beginning because I didn't know when was the best time for me to write. And at that point in my life, I only had 12 hours a week to write because my son had just been born, and I hired a babysitter so I could write. And so I only had 12 hours a week, and it was really important to me that these 12 hours be my most productive 12 hours I could get. And so I wrote at different times of the day and recorded my progress to see how I was doing. And at the end of a month, I very clearly wrote better in the afternoon when I was away from the internet, when I was somewhere I couldn't get internet. Like, those days would have amazing gains in productivity just from location. And so what I did was I then made sure that all of my writing took place in my hours and location of greatest productivity. And that change added another like 2,000 to 3,000 words per session on. It was amazing. Just being in a internet-free place at my most productive time of day. And for people who write kind of in the margins of writing, this is both great and kind of hard because a lot of times you don't have control over when you can write. But to those people, I always suggest, try writing in the morning and try writing at night. Which is easier? Which works better for you? When do you get better words? And then focus on hitting that time every day. And so once you figure out your best place, your best time to write, and by extension your best place, that's a huge bonus. And the third part of the triangle is enthusiasm. You have to be excited about what you're writing. And I mentioned earlier that excitement's a huge point, and I can't stress this enough, and this is something I think that a lot of writing books and writing lessons kind of leave out, is the thrill of telling your story and being really excited about what you're trying to write. Because if you're not excited about your own scenes, who is? I mean, it's like if you're a mother and you don't love your child, well, who will love your child? You have to be excited about your own work. And if you're not excited about a scene that's happening, if you have a scene that you just kind of, you had to get through it to get to somewhere else, well, why are you making your reader go through it too? You have to be excited about what you're writing. But if you are excited about what you are writing, you will write really fast. If you know where you're going and you're in like your prime time of day and you are excited about what you're writing, I guarantee you will blaze through those words. It's like it's basically arranging to have your best writing day every day is kind of what my system does. And I hear no end of stories about people who've doubled their word counts, people who've gone to, because not everyone hits 10K. Not everyone has that sort of time in their day. Because that's me writing for 6 to 8 hours. That's a lot of writing. But I have tons of people who are like, I have 1 hour a day to write. And I went from writing 500 words in that hour to writing 1,200 words in that hour, which is amazing. You've basically doubled your rate of writing. And so it's really just a way of thinking, and it works for people who plot and for people who just kind of find their way through the story, because knowing what you're going to write, figuring out that scene, you can do that organically or you can do that by your plot. It doesn't matter. The point is you're taking the time before you write to figure out what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And when you combine it with the other two, you turbocharge. It's amazing. And the first science fiction novel, the one I mentioned where I knew everything that was going to happen for plotting, I wrote that book in 12 days. And it's not a short book. It's, I think, 85,000 words. I wrote that book in 12 days. And that's counting 3 days I took off because I decided the book should be in first person, not third. And I went back and changed everything from third person to first. So it was really more like 9 days, and that's including also the time I spent planning. And that's the fastest I've ever written a book. And let me tell you, when you are writing that fast and you are loving what you're getting and you know where you're going, it is like being high. It is like the best feeling on the planet. You are just you are soaring. It's like reading a really good book. Only you get to decide where it goes. It's your book, and it's really awesome. And that feeling of intense happiness with your own work is something that we don't talk a lot about in writing. Like when a lot of times you hear all this stuff about writing, or you see memes about writing, it's about the grindy, I'm bleeding fingers on the keyboard, and that's not what writing should be about. Writing is an art. Writing is what you want to do. Writing should be joyful and fun. Yeah. And if you're not having fun, then something is wrong. And being able to write quickly, for me at least, helped me unlock the joy of my own work. To be able to just flow with the story and just fly with it and have the best time of my life. And I love writing so much more than I used to. Because it used to be like I used to joke that I loved having written. Like I liked having the book. I didn't actually like getting the book. Now, the actual writing process is probably the best part of my day. And once I finish a book, I'm already moving on to the next one because I want that next story. And it's amazing. And that is, I think, even more than getting books out quickly, that is the joy of writing fast, to be able to truly fall in love with your own stories because you're actually moving at a pace where you can keep the excitement.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like really like the key principle here that basically all your tips on writing faster are taken account is you're trying to basically minimize the mistakes, right? Like you're basically planning ahead and plotting it out and making sure you know where you're going and writing at the right time of day and eliminating distractions. You're basically getting rid of all that bad stuff that can hold you back or make you rewrite the whole book, that kind of thing. And when you get rid of those kind of and for most authors, I mean, that's like the worst experience ever is throwing out a book or having to rewrite an entire book. I mean,
Oh, cutting
yeah,
those
I mean,
2,000
spending a
words.
day planning is painful, but you know, compare that to writing a whole new, like rewriting an entire book, that's way worse. So it's kind of like you're spending, you know, and if you hate to plan, you don't feel like you're an organizational person, you know, it's a lot better, trust me, to spend half a day or a day planning than to spend, you know, weeks or months rewriting an entire book.
Absolutely. There's nothing more crushing than realizing that your book is broken and you have to go rewrite everything and fix it. And it's no fun. It can be really painful, especially if you've sacrificed to get your writing in and you thought you were almost done and then you realize you're going to have to do months more of work. That's soul crushing right there. And so and that's one of the things my methods really focus on is cutting out the wasted time, cutting out the dross, cutting out the, oh, I made a stupid mistake and now I have to go lose these 5 paragraphs. All that stuff that bleeds your writing time away and slows you down, that cuts it out. And I hear people, the number one criticism I hear often from people who haven't read my books or haven't read the book is that, oh, she writes 10,000 words a day. It can't possibly be any good. She must be a hack. She must be churning out. You know, why would I ever want to write 10,000 words a day when I'm just going to have to rewrite all of them? They're probably only 40% of them are useful. And those people make me want to tear my hair out because I'm like, I'm a professional author. Why would I ever want to waste my time writing words I'm not going to keep? That is incredibly stupid. I would never do that. If I'm writing words, they have to be good. They have to be good words that are going in a book. Otherwise, I'm just wasting my time. And these 10,000 words a day I'm writing, for the most part, are every bit as good as back when I used to write 2,000 words a day. They're the same words, the same writing. I've just cut out all the time I spent checking my email when I was supposed to be writing. I cut out all the time I spent rewriting because I made a stupid mistake. I cut out all the kind of tooling around lost in my own work. Like I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just kind of writing stuff until it does. I cut all that out. It's dross. I removed the dross, and when you cut out all that, what's left is just pure, wonderful writing. You're literally only doing the best parts of writing. It's only the best. And I think that I'm a much better writer now that I'm fast than I ever was when I was slow. Because moving quickly, taking the time to cut out the dross, it removes a bunch of the mistakes that I had been leaving in because it might have been too much trouble to fix them. I'm like, it would have been better to write it this way, but it's okay as it is. And now, I don't settle for okay. If it would have been better to write it another way, I go back and change it. Because I know that 10,000 words of rewriting is only going to take me a day. And that's an amazing feeling of freedom that leads to better books, a better writing experience, and I think a better experience for my readers because they really get a much better product than they did back when I was dragging my feet. So, yeah, basically never tell me my 10,000 words a day must be crap because I will punch you. That makes me so mad.
Yeah.
I can't even express it.
I know what you mean, and it's funny too. Like if you compare like writing to any other art, like you know painting. You know, I've seen artists paint like an incredible canvas in half an hour, and I mean no one would say, oh well, you painted that so fast it can't be good. I mean you look at it and it's just like this amazing work of art. You know, it's inspired, and I think that's what you're getting at here is that when you really you master the writing process and you get rid of all those little mistakes that hold you back and that take all the fun out of writing, what happens is you're just inspired, and you're on purpose, and you unleash your creative spirit on your work, and it's much better, and it's faster, and it's easier, and it looks like it might look from the outside like a third party, like, oh, she's cheating, or it's too fast, but it really is just you've mastered the process. You become a master at what you do, and when you become a master, you make difficult things like writing a book, which is a really difficult thing, you make it look easy because you are so inspired and you're doing it the right way.
Exactly. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the idea that time has value, that, oh, this book took me 18 months to write, it must be good. Well, that's also the same thing as, oh, that book only took you 2 weeks to write, it must be crap. It's two sides of the same coin. And we really have to divorce ourselves from the idea that time input equals writing quality, because it's not true. The only thing that matters in writing is the end product, is the book.
Yeah.
If you get a good book, I don't care how you got it. So long as you're not plagiarizing someone, I don't care if you wrote it in a day. If it's good, I'm going to like it. And that's how readers are, because a lot of readers, they don't even notice your name. They look at the title, they look at the cover, they read the blurb, they say, oh, that sounds cool, and they try it. They don't care how long that took you to write it. They don't care if it was 10 years or 10 days. They just want a good book they're going to like. And we as writers tend to get very hung up on time because it's our time, and we inherently value it. But especially when you're doing self-publishing, you have to think, what is the finished product? What finished product am I aiming for, and how can I get to that efficiently and in a way that's going to create a really quality product? And to really kind of throw away the idea that this has value because I spent time on it, and to start looking at what makes your book have value intrinsically, like the characters, the quality of the prose, the unique ideas you bring forth. Those are the things that sell books, not time. And when I learned to write faster, I basically stopped focusing on the time and started focusing on, which sounds kind of backwards, but I did. I stopped focusing on the time and started really focusing on what's going to make this book amazing. What's going to make people want to throw money at me to get their hands on this book. And that's what you got to focus on, is what's going to make this book awesome.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, it's been an awesome interview, Rachel. Thank you so much. Before you go, tell us where people can find out more info about you and the work that you're doing.
Excellent. Well, you can find everything you ever wanted to know about me and my books at rachelaaron.net, and that's RACHELAARON.net, and that has links to my blog, which is a writing blog that also has it has information on traditional publishing, because I was traditionally published for 8 books, and it also has information about self-publishing, because I'm now self-publishing my new series, which is Nice Dragons Finish Last.
Awesome.
And
congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been doing really well. I actually just posted all my sales numbers and my experience with Kindle Universe, or Kindle Unlimited, sorry, over there. So I've got numbers. And you can also find samples of all my books and links to other interviews I've done on the site. So just go to rachelaaron.net. It's got my mailing list signups and everything, Twitter feed, everything you could ever want.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a blast.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too. Thank you.